Today, in this video that I wasn't going to make until a couple days ago, I decided to ponder over a couple chapters I've read in the Silmarillion. This is an excellent tome. It's a very depressing one, though I've read about though throughout this journey into this novel, this tome, I found that there were plenty of choices characters have made that I wondered, what could they have made otherwise? What if they could have made a different choice? We love the what ifs, we love the alternate histories, we love the what ifs. And today's what if is something that I wrote the very night I read about the Battle of the Unnumbered Tears, which harkened back to Mandos's prophecy, the doom of the Noldor, how unnumbered tears they would weep, and how he basically prophesied the doom that they would not win against Morgoth without the aid of the Valar. And I thought to myself, that sounds kind of pompous. It sounds really pompous, and Fëanor actually had a lot of good ideas there. He was pretty much an egotistical, almost maniac in times of ways, but he had a point. He had a point. The Valar were pretty much hypocrites. They were pompous, and they basically all but given up on Middle-earth. And outside of maybe Ulmo, nobody else seemed to be helping as much as they should. Maybe Manwë with the Eagles, but it's like, why aren't these guys actually coming out here? They know where Morgoth is. Tolkas, of anybody, should have been coming out over here and breaking down the doors of Angband, dragging Morgoth, kicking and screaming back to Aman. And it's like, had you done so, maybe Fëanor wouldn't have done what he did. He wouldn't have just been pissy about everything, It's like you guys knew where Morgoth was, but you chose not to do anything. You allowed both the Sindarins, who are not part of the doom of the Noldor, you allowed them to be punished and put into pain and death by Morgoth. You allowed the humans, the second children of Ilúvatar, to basically become mass enslaved and put into mass amounts of death and destruction and darkness that traveled across the lands. And it's like, I would agree with Fëanor that the blame for all of that would be placed upon the Valar. It would be their fault for all of this, because they could have stopped this. Morgoth was very diminished at this point. It's like, Tolkas could have came out here and dragged him back. Anybody could have, but nobody chose to. Nobody did. Nobody broke the siege of Angband. Nobody decided to come in there and do what needed to be done. So I thought, what if something went right? What if everything went right? What if they won the War of Wrath? What if the Noldor avoided the doom of the Noldor? What if the Noldor could have surprised everybody? What if the House of Finwë could have surprised even that of the Valar and made them realize that if Melkor could give in to fear, darkness, that maybe also the Valar could be mistaken in their own judgments? Something to think about. So let's read off this little notepad article that I wrote up in the span of a couple minutes in the middle of the night after reading this chapter, to see what if this could pretend. I didn't find anything like this on YouTube, and I don't claim to be a Tolkien scholar. I don't have the History of Middle-earth volumes 1 through 3. I don't have the full versions of the Children of Húrin and Beren and Luthien and the Fall of Gondolin, or I may eventually get them. Yeah, I may eventually collect them in time, but it's just something I think about after rereading this chapter, and it's like, So let's read through it here. The what if of the First Age. Fëanor forsook Valinor, forsook the Valar, and told them off to their faces, telling them plain and true that they would give Middle-earth to Morgoth, that they would give the Silmarils to him, that they would allow the dying of the world, they would allow the second children of Iluvatar to be destroyed by the evils of Morgoth, for indeed, without the protection set in place by the Noldor to hold Morgoth back for those 4 great centuries, the 3 houses of the Edain would not have flourished. Doriath certainly would not have had the strength to fight Morgoth alone. Doriath would have been besieged, it would have been perished, as Melian waned with the years, and Thingol grew more and more desperate. Had Feanor not forsaken the Valar to chase Morgoth across the seas to Middle-earth, things would have looked incredibly bleak for the proud lands of the far west of Beleriand. Imagine for a moment Feanor and the Noldor are prevented their going. The Valar are willing to pursue Morgoth into the east, and Morgoth is allowed to tarry there, building his anger, his ire, at his forces. The first thing to fall would the havens be, and Círdan pushed inwards into Doriath, where he would wait with Thingol as Doriath is besieged from all sides by the black armies of the great enemy. The fair lands of the Green Elves would burn, and their kind taken as slaves. The races of men that would come into the west would be captured and turned to the evils of Morgoth and would flee back eastwards from whence they come. But this would not save them for too terribly long. Morgoth would capture Doriath through attrition, and it would perish. Melian's girdle would not protect against so great an evil for so great a long time. With the falling of Doriath would come the falling of Beleriand, and then Morgoth would push eastwards into Eriador, and that would fall next to him. Then the south across the misty mountains, where the lands would perish next. Greenwood the Great would turn dark and foul. The dwarves would close their kingdoms off to the surface, but would be overrun as Morgoth's creatures, also friends of the deep and dark places, would push to them the surface, where they would meet their ends. And so Middle-earth would come under Morgoth's destructive might, for there lacked any that might stand against him for long, save Doriath and possibly the Dwarven realms. This is why Feanor had to have come. This is why Fingolfin, following him, had to have come. And we wondered to ourselves, what if this went a little differently? What if we looked at this strategically? Feanor stands at the shores, trembling with anger, and a hand to his shoulder stills him. For Finwë was Fingolfin's father too, and they reconcile in the desire to see Morgoth led to answer for his crimes. The fire in Feanor would burn bright for another errand, this one of strategy. He would be patient, he would be cunning, and he would be convincing. He would gather more of the Noldor to arms, with Fingolfin offering aid and assistance, for together there might be naught the brothers could not accomplish. Together they might even convince Finarfin to follow them. The 3 would go to the Telerian peace. Perhaps they might even convince them the lending of their ships. Perhaps even with Fingolfin explaining the darkness of the east, and now that Morgoth has come to it, that the Teleri kin in the havens of Beleriand, and a Doriath who tarried there during the travels to the west, would be Morgoth's first victims, should he remain in Middle-earth uncontested. For love of their Sindarin kin, the Teleri relinquish these ships willingly, and Feanor's impatience would be stilled, for he would not underestimate his foe this time in this retelling. He would be brought to council and reminded it took all of the Valar to bring Melkor to heel, and before, diminished though Morgoth might be this time, it would take a great force to bring the foe to heel. So Feanor returns the ships once ashore, and Fingolfin comes next, with Finarfin following. The Noldor all would arrive in Middle-earth, and if not, there would be kinslaying. There might even be the Teleri amongst the Noldoran host. But they do not go north just yet to make battle, but to make reconnaissance. The oath taken must not be broken, but time does not demand of Feanor an immediate recompense of such an oath, so long as the oath is met in the end. So patience wins the day, and Feanor and his kin wait, their fire hot, but it is checked. Finarfin goes to Doriath with his host to beg of Thingol to send reason and offer their aid. For only the greatest host in all of Middle-earth, when all hath come together, could so beat back a black evil that begins to plague it. To stay here in shelter would grant only a temporary respite, and for Doriath, Finarfin would seek an eternal respite. Out of this Thingol could be convinced by if Finarfin those words come. So then the north, the great elven king goes with the host of Doriath, and the host of the dwarves, whom have them been befriended. So mighty this host, so great this host, and with much reconnaissance made, the Noldor, the Sindar, the dwarves, they besiege Angband, as before, with numbers massed and with patience great. And the evil is contained to the north like before, but this time the Noldor retained the fire that is Fëanor, a fire that would not go out, that would not simmer away into nothingness for anything less than victory. With this alliance, the Eldar might wait out the next 4 centuries to the coming of the Edain, with whom they would still befriend and teach against the evils of Morgoth. Seeing such unity, Fëanor must be emboldened by then. He would feel himself mighty as king over all, but ever he must be checked. Ever checked his ego should be, for he should be taught to caution. The far-sighted must restrain this fire, lest he burn himself out. In this alternate tale, Fëanor and Fingolfin and Finarfin rule equally their kin of the Noldor, and they would not relinquish their power so readily. Instead, I would argue that with the alliance of Doriath Holy, the numbers amassed here after 4 great centuries, centuries taken to build numbers, to set roots, to build fortresses and garrisons, and to love one another, and amass new generations of kin whom would grow to fight this dark enemy. The Eldar would have the numbers needed to take Angband from Morgoth in due time. Fëanor is the example to the Valar, as he should be, that the strength of those following, the Valar, of those of the Eldar, of those of the second children, this should not be underestimated, but should be aided, nurtured, and left to grow. And the Valar must see their folly in allowing Morgoth to tarry, for indeed, as Fëanor's very words to them would have been, all that Morgoth has wrought comes no fault from Fëanor, but of Manwë who let him be released. Had Morgoth remained enchained, he would not have been able to manage nearly any that he had. The trees would be lit still, and there could be peace amongst the Noldor, for there would be no darkness. His living is a must for this alternate hypothetical to be made true. From Fëanor would come crafted enchanted weapons and arms to be distributed amongst man, elf, and dwarf alike, until regaled in full all the host of the west would come against Morgoth like a crushing wave, so full and so just that the dark foe would be full of that which he hates to taste. Fear. This fear would stall his oaks, would slow his wolves, would unhasten his balrogs, and would falter his dragons. Undaunted this host might be, that Angband might surely fall, taken in chains, his crown hewn from his head, the Silmaril should be returned to Fëanor for his oath to be fulfilled. What next should come, that Morgoth be returned to Valinor, for with the black foe in tow, the way would surely not be shut to them. Indeed, if taken to the shore, Ulmo himself might appear to ferry him across for justice, for it seemed that he alone of any of the Valar were willing to do anything about Morgoth to begin with. The full truth of this would be the setting aside of one's pride, of one's differences, and of words that may have been spoken in brash anger. The repentance of Fëanor would be needed indeed here, for he would need humbling. Oath fulfilled, the only way to break such a thing would be to relinquish them freely once recovered. And this, upon Morgoth's return to Valinor in chains, should be in order for the relighting of the 2 trees. Never again Fëanor could make such gems, but again he might make something greater and new for the future. For his fire continues to burn now, and the west has been saved, and the dark foe returned to Aman for justice swift. For even a Valar can be returned humbled, and be made to see error. If a Valar such as Melkor could know fear, a Valar such as Manwë might know humility and error in sight. Apologies would come from all sides. But personally, I do see these folk winning the day. I can see this happening. I can see the Noldor winning against Morgoth, but things needed to have happened in just the right ways in order to do it. For indeed, many things had to have happened in the manner in which they happened for the Noldor to lose in the way that they did. Fëanor had to cut from himself the bulk of his forces in his haste to defeat Morgoth, that he lost his life for his troubles, the burning of those ships. Fingolfin, in his grief, had to have challenged Morgoth to single combat in order to have lost his life. Maedhros, in his haste, had to have rushed this counter-offensive against Morgoth for the unnumbered tears to have been had. Turgon's sister had to have left Gondolin for Myclin to have been born. Thingol had to have withheld aid to both Noldor and man alike in order for Doriath to have enveloped him upon itself. Thingol would have had to have ignored the counsel of his wife, the wiser Melian, in order for destruction to have wrought Doriath. Thingol, again, would have had to have refused to give the Silmaril, which Beren retrieved, to the sons of Feanor in order for the second kinslaying to have happened. Again, going against Melian's counsel, who told him to hand the Silmaril over. Many things had to have happened in these manners. Errors had to have been made, for these consequences to have befallen the Noldor, in order for this story to be told in the way it is. So what if mistakes weren't made after the slaying of Finwë? What if Finwë's death was actually the spark that reunited the three brothers in a just vengeance against the dark foe, out of an attempt to rid Middle-earth of an evil that it did not deserve, for it came from a man, and from a man it should be dealt? What if the Noldor had succeeded against all expectations, providing the folly of the Vala, and showing the Vala that they are made imperfect too, and capable of making mistakes, just as Feanor is capable of redemption? What if Feanor's rage could have been tempered, and the first kinslaying averted? The doom of Noldor would not have been uttered, should the kinslaying have been averted. It's something to think about at any rate.